Welcome to the Low Carb USA podcast, where we seek to inspire you to help us build this community. I'm Doug Reynolds.
And this is Pam Devine.
So Adele, I don't know. There's only one person I think that's more excited than me right now. And that's just so people know, this will probably come out right at the same time that we actually launch this new nonprofit society for metabolic health practitioners. Yeah, I'm just going to get out of your way, as I said to you before we started this. I'm going to get out of your way and tell us from your perspective what this is and why you're so excited and what you think it's all about.
Well, this is a game changer to me. So I've been in and around the low carb community for 20 some years, from my own personal experiences to working with Dr. Eric Westman when he opened his Duke Lifestyle Medicine Clinic. So I was there when the doors opened, and I have fond memories of working with Eric and all of the patients that we had, and then working with Richard Feynman on various projects. I work with Gary Taubes on various projects. Nina Teicholz and I have worked on a few things. And it's just, I've gotten to observe the landscape without, I guess, really being overly involved. Anyway, behind the scenes, the way that I see it. And this is the culmination of a number of things that I think really started in about 2015, which was after I've been working with Gary on a project that ended. I started my my PhD program in communication, rhetoric, and digital media, which opened my eyes to a really different way of thinking about the low carb landscape. And in the spring of that year, we had a conference call. Rodney Cartocci, Dave Weed, Gary Taubes, and I were, and I think they only asked me to be in on the call so that somebody would take notes. So I was there to take notes, and we started talking about what we would like to see happen. And Gary and I have been talking for a while about bringing the community together. The low carb community has been really scattered. I was talking to Andreas Einfeld at Diet Doctor about this before I went to work for him, and he said, yes, we spent about a decade wandering in the wilderness, and that's pretty true. So we had Dr. Atkins, who, for better or for worse, was at least the person that, if in the 70s and 80s and until his death, if you wanted to know about low carb, you knew who to talk to. The arrow pointed right at him. But after his death, there really wasn't a clear leader in the movement. Steve Finney and Jeff Volek were doing their work. Eric was doing his work. The American Society of Bariatric Physicians, which wasn't focused on low carb, but had a strong contingent of low carb clinicians in it, they were doing their work to move forward the message. Richard Feynman and the Nutrition and Metabolism Society, they were working on things. And it was just sort of diffuse and spread out. Everyone was in their little silo. We didn't really have anyone who the media would know to go to ask about low carb. And then Gary Taubes sort of burst on the scene with his book, Good Calories, Bad Calories. And that was in 2007. And that changed the landscape. All of a sudden, there was someone that everybody knew you could ask questions about low carb to, and he would provide some answers. And as brilliant as Gary is, and I'm a huge fan and a huge admirer, he's not a clinician. So that made things a little bit problematic when we start to talk about, how do people actually do this? And he has lots of great ideas and things like that, but not having that clinical experience is a little bit of a handicap in terms of leading a movement that's really directed at patient and individual care. So it's sort of ironic that we got this start with Dave Weed and Rodney and Gary and I, none of whom were clinicians except for me. I'm a registered dietitian, and I worked with Eric in the clinic. And we started talking about how we bring this community together Well, after a year in my communication and rhetoric and digital media program, my thinking about this really changed. So in the past, I had thought, I think like we all tend to think, if people just know, if they just knew about this diet, they would change what they do. If policymakers just knew, they would support us. If doctors just knew, they would change their practice. And I learned that knowledge is not enough. That there's a different aspect to communication, especially science and health communication. It isn't just about knowing. We need something else. We need a way of being, something to point to, something that's ours, something that says, I belong with this group. So without something to point to and say, this is us and this is who we are, we're just this, a bunch of yappers on social media. And social media has been a place for us to come together, but it still didn't give us a place to be. So this is where the standard of care and all of that conversation came up. Rodney started a listserv, and a couple of other listservs bubbled up after that. It gave clinicians a place to have conversations, but we still didn't have anything to really rally around. By luck, or as chance would have it, I happened to be in a malpractice, on a jury in a malpractice suit, and got schooled in what a standard of care is. Now, I had always thought that a standard of care is a set of guidelines, like clinical guidelines that the ADA hands out, and then you follow these, and that's your standard of care. Well, it's really not. It is, and a lot of physicians think that too. So they think that they have to follow a standard of care given by an insurance company or given by the ADA. It's not. Standard of care is a live thing. It is how a group of professionals practice their profession, given a similar background or education and a similar population that they're treating or working with. So, for instance, in this case, it might be a group of clinicians, family practitioners, internal medicine people, endocrinologists, who have all been trained in metabolic health and who are treating people who have type 2 diabetes or prediabetes or metabolic syndrome with a particular kind of diet. So we didn't have anything that spoke to us about what a standard of care would be. And so this is where you come in with Low Carb USA and getting Gary to have this town hall to find out from the people who attend Low Carb USA what they want and what would be helpful to them. And so this idea of creating a general protocol that would belong to the community, be by clinicians and for clinicians, where they could put their input about what a low carb diet meant to them in their practice, and where they could sort of gather with other clinicians and say, here is what we all agree on, here is what we all do. And so we created the general protocol. I did that, my dissertation was over here and the general protocol was over here. But it was really, really fun to work on because it was something that just, I would go out to the community, the board of advisors that you put together, and get information from those experts, arrange it, give it back to them. They'd give me feedback and back and forth until we had some guidance that we all agreed on or agreed to disagree on, which is the same thing. And then when we presented it, as you know, the community embraced it as theirs. So there we had something that we could rally around. I still have people email me or message me at Diet Doctor and say, I printed up that general protocol that's at Low Carb USA, and I took it to my doctor, and that convinced my doctor to help me reduce my medication and to help me do a low carb diet safely and effectively.
That is so cool to hear, man. I tell you.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
Isn't it? And
Yeah.
frankly, with that, I could die happy because that's there. And what it does, it isn't a standard of care, but it allows us to begin to create one.
Right.
But the Society for Metabolic Health Practitioners takes that a step further, because what it then does give us, I mean, I can't even begin to name the things that it gives us. It gives us a home. It gives us a nonprofit that allows us to fundraise for the projects that we're interested in and the communication messages that we're interested in. It gives a home for the general protocol and the protocols that will come off of that. It gives us an educational program for us to say, when you put together that stream of educational steps that a metabolic health practitioner will go through, at the end of which they get that stamp, that badge that says, I'm a metabolic health practitioner, that's that common background that we're talking about. So that when the judge was educating us about this, that's that common background that when we have a group of people practicing and follow, who's all been educated the same way and practicing following these protocols, then we do start to have a standard of care. And what that means is that if you're a clinician using low carb in your community and you feel like there's a big target on your back and you're just the lone voice in the wilderness, you're not anymore. You can point to us and say, look, there's a whole society of metabolic health practitioners who treat their patients the same way that I do. I am not alone. I'm not alone legally. I'm not alone in terms of education. I'm not alone in terms of information. I have a home, and it's a really, really wonderful thing to think about. So this is sort of the other part of, we've got the general protocol, and now we have a place to gather as a community around that protocol and around each other. And we have a secret weapon. Cecile, Seth has just done a marvelous job of organizing not just this group, but other groups that are adjacent to it, and getting us all to speak, as it were, as David Pendergrass likes to say, with one voice on these matters. And this is a paradigm-changing voice. It's not just about another professional organization like, the American Association of Endocrinologists or something like that. It's not just another group of professionals. This is a game-changing, paradigm-shifting way of thinking about who we are and what we do. And what I love about this so much is that it's in the name. The Society of Metabolic Health Practitioners. It's not low-carb practitioners. It's not keto practitioners. It's not carnivore practitioners. It's not any of that. It's not even lifestyle practitioners. It is metabolic health. It tells you what we're aiming for. What do we want people who we treat and we interact with to walk away with? Metabolic health. Right. Do we care how you get there? We don't. All plant diet? Fine. All meat diet? Fine. Doesn't matter. Do you want to exercise? You don't. Okay. Or you can't. Okay. We are not going to take our values and our ideas about what is right and insist that you walk down that path, which is what it seems all of these other organizations who take a particular diet or a particular way of living and elevate it and say, this is the one path to health. And so we're not making that mistake. And this is what makes my heart go pitter-pat. And this is what makes me really, really excited about this organization, because it has a very big tent and it allows a lot of people in there. Now, we do insist that you can't dismiss low carbohydrate diets, and you can't dismiss diets where we're using therapeutic carbohydrate reduction to intervene in diets. But we're also not making what I consider the original big mistake, which is saying that this diet is the one path, the one diet for everyone. We are not saying that. We are saying that this is a clinical intervention to be used in specific circumstances where we think it will benefit the individual. So when you look back on how we got here, that was the first big mistake. I know that a lot of people think that our first big mistake was a low-fat diet, but that was not it. Our first big mistake was taking a clinical intervention, which happened to be a low-fat diet, taking a clinical intervention that was for a specific group of identified individuals, people with high risk of heart disease, people who had already had a cardiac event, or people who had obesity. We're taking that group and that clinical intervention for that group, and we turned it into public health guidance. And this diet is going to be the right diet for everyone, whether or not they have any of those risk factors, whether or not they have a history of heart disease, whether or not they've had a heart attack, whether or not they have obesity. And we saw what happened. I'm not going to make the argument that everybody followed a low-fat diet, because that's not true. I'm not even going to make the argument that everybody even knows about the kind of diet that was in this public health guidance. But what we do know happened is that guidance went from a clinical intervention to public health, and then ironically and sort of horribly, it ended up back in the clinic. So that when you walk into a clinic and you have diabetes, guess what? You get treated through a public health lens. And as far as I'm concerned, that's not just clinically inadequate, it's unethical. I want my patients to be treated as individuals, not as statistics. And that's what public health is. Public health is treating a population statistic. But emphatically, the Society for Metabolic Health Practitioners is working on clinical interventions that are focused on individuals. And I think that's critically important. And what the reasons that this is so important is that it really shifts the conversation. So what you'll hear from a lot of people, even people in the low carb community, is that if you have a chronic disease or if you have obesity, whose fault is it? It's your fault. It's your fault because you didn't eat less and move more, or it's your fault because you didn't cut out the carbs. It's your fault. We have the information. Now you just have to follow the information. Eric Westman, I love him to death, but he's wrong about this. He says, low carb diet always works if you do it right. Well, you know what? Everything always works if you do it right, right? That's not, that statement doesn't tell us anything. People would make that same argument for low-fat diets. A low-fat, low-calorie diet will work if you do it right. It might, yeah, probably. But will you be miserable? Why can't you do it right? I mean, that's the question. And sometimes people can't do low-carb diets. And for that matter, sometimes when people do low-carb diets right, it's still not the right diet for them. I mean, we've seen that in clinic. So we have to take another approach. And that's why having metabolic health in the title instead of a dietary approach in the title frees us from blaming our patients. It frees us from blaming the individual, because then we can't say, you didn't do it right. We have to say, we're forced to say, well, we need to find another pathway to get you to metabolic health, because the one that I gave you the first time didn't work for you, whether or not you did it right. David Unwin is brilliant in his approach with his patients because he doesn't interrogate them about what they ate. He informs them about what they need to do, educates them about carbohydrate reduction, sends them on their way, and when they come back, what he talks about with them is what happened. Not what did they do, but what does their waistline show? What does their weight show? What do their glucose numbers show? And if things didn't change, he doesn't say, well, did you follow the instructions that I gave you? He assumes that his patients either, couldn't figure out from the information that he gave them, or maybe it wasn't the right time for them. He gives them the information again, maybe in a different way. Maybe he gives them more support. He helps them understand why their numbers didn't change, rather than telling them, shame on you, you didn't follow the diet. And he'll show you that sometimes it takes 3 or 4 tries for a person to really get it. And he just sticks with it, giving them the information that they need, giving them the support that they need, giving them the encouragement that they need, and moving forward. And this is really, really important for us as practitioners. And like I said, it's there in the name. Metabolic health. We're going to keep people moving toward metabolic health, no matter how many times they don't get there. We keep moving in that direction, and we'll keep shifting the information, giving them support, figuring out how to help them until they figure out what works for them. So instead of taking this big one-size-fits-all picture and trying to stuff individuals into it, we take the individuals and we fit the diet to the individual. This is critically different from everything else that we've seen before. And it's how dietitians are trained, ironically enough, because dietitians are bad for telling people that the basis for a healthy diet is, whole grains and lots of fruits and vegetables and lean meat and low-fat milk, even though we know, we're trained that an individual comes into your clinic, you treat the individual. So I think that this is going to be a huge step in moving us away from that blame the individual mindset and that making the patient fit a particular dietary protocol that may or may not work for that individual patient.
Yeah.
So that's exciting. Gosh, the list of things that are really amazing about this movement. Gosh, maybe the first one is that it's clinicians. It's clinicians leading the charge this time. You have some wonderful people on your board. And when Cecile and you and I and other people have begun to gather together our forces, we have clinicians who have busy day jobs, remember, coming out of the woodwork to say, how can we help? What can we do? We're busy, yes, but we so believe in this project that we want to help out despite the fact that our plates are already full. And it's really amazing because they know that they're the place where the rubber meets the road. So their involvement and their voice and their buy-in to this is critical. We've, like I said, after Atkins, we had Gary sort of at the forefront of things. We had Nina come with her book in 2014. These were all really important moments when that conversation about how bad the science is and how off track we've gotten about diet and health outcomes. We moved that conversation into the public sphere through those books, but it didn't change that much in the clinical situation. It gave us, we began to be able to identify each other and see each other. Diet Doctor has been a big help in helping clinicians identify each other and see each other and to know that we're not alone. But to have a place where we can speak as one voice, where we can be our own experts, our own advocates, where we can begin to change the way the public is educated and change the way clinicians are educated, which I think is the two big missions of this group. So its focus is education, and those are the people that we're going to educate. The public has the right to know that diabetes is not a progressive disease that you treat with medication and just sort of manage as your medication doses increase, as your complications worsen, and it never goes away. You never get your health back. You never get your normal life back. Your life is now sort of revolves around your disease. I saw this happen tragically with my uncle. All of a sudden, the compression socks and the coolers and all of the things that you have to be a person with diabetes who is managed through medication. People deserve the right to know that there's another path, potentially. Not everybody can get off all medication through lifestyle and dietary changes, but we can do a lot. We can change a lot. We can reduce, if not eliminate, medication. We can minimize complications. We can prevent progression of the disease. We can prevent progression from pre-diabetes to full-blown diabetes. That happened with me. With my dad, he had full-blown diabetes when he was diagnosed in his 60s. And, he got a glucometer and some biochemistry nutrition for me, and lived many happy, healthy years following his grandchildren from sports event to sports event, and died with all of his toes. And this is in such a huge contrast to what I saw as a dietitian in the hospitals when I did my rotations, and I would go to the diabetic wound clinic. They had a wound clinic specifically for people with diabetes. I know, it was horrifying. It was like a war zone. And these people were losing toes, feet, lower legs, and all of those wounds had to be treated. And when I would talk to people about my dad's experience, they would look at me horrified that they had not been given similar information, and it would make me feel even worse. And when I was doing this, you know, I was trying to keep it on the down low because, you know, not everybody is thinks that this is a good idea. But the nurse who ran the wound clinic was cheering me on. She says, I don't know why we don't have dietitians in here doing this all the time. And these people deserve to be able to keep their appendages. And I think that's true. And my dad, every time I saw him walking around the house without his socks on and I saw his little toes, I was like, oh, I could make my heart go. We can do this. The Society for Metabolic Health Practitioners is going to save toes. It's going to save feet. It's going to save lives. I mean, this is something that is our responsibility, and we can do it because we're going to teach people to go to their doctors and to say, I want my toes. I don't want medication. I want my toes.
I think it's going to save economies too, because of the decrease in drug costs and stuff like that. Even if you just look at type 2 diabetes, apart from all the other conditions that we know that it can help with as well, just type 2.
Yes.
It's astronomical how much. In fact, Dave, you mentioned Dave Unwin. I saw a post from him just today, I think, where he was talking about how much, because in the UK, they have this NHS, right? So they actually, the NHS pays for the actual treatment. They pay for the treatment and the drugs. And he said, I forget the number now, but that he had saved the NHS in the last year many thousands of pounds. And he worked it out that if all physicians in the NHS program did that, it would save them something like 400 and something million pounds a year or something. It's like, you know, and I've heard doom and gloom predictions about where our economy will be in a few years if we keep going down this road with the skyrocketing drug and medical costs.
Yeah. And the medical costs are not just limited to medicine, you know, not just the payouts and all of that. It's, you know, loss of productive work time.
Yes, totally.
You know, the economy, you know, disability that we have to pay out when people have both of their legs amputated and they can no longer drive a car, or, you know, there's no public transportation in a lot of places. Truck drivers who can't drive their trucks anymore because they're now on insulin. Pilots can't fly. It's really important that we figure this out for the economic costs, but the human costs are, you know, my dad died of a glioblastoma, of a brain tumor. And when we couldn't even get his brain tumor biopsy, we didn't know it was a tumor at the time. We just saw a lesion on the scans. We couldn't get his brain tumor biopsied because they thought that he had uncontrolled diabetes. So they saw diabetes in his chart. They saw that he was on no medication. They assumed he had uncontrolled diabetes and refused to do a biopsy because they said, well, kill him. He'll just bleed out. So when I explained to him, and it took a couple of tries, when I explained to him that yes, diabetes was in his chart, but you could stick him as many times as you want, and you're never going to get a reading that says that he has diabetes. They changed their mind. They did the biopsy, but anytime you go in for an MRI, which you have a lot of if you have a brain tumor, they ask you if you're on diabetes medications. I mean, it's much harder to treat people who have other diseases if they also have full-blown diabetes. They don't heal. They don't tolerate therapy. Well, my dad had the tumor operated on. He had a scar from the top of his head down to his ear. That was the opening on his skull. They removed it. They covered him back up. That was on a Wednesday. He went to a swim meet, my nephew's swim meet, that weekend. I mean, that's how quickly he bounced back. And
so how quickly he recovered, because that's another thing that people, apart from everything else, how quickly you recover, not just physically from an effort, like a run or something like that. People talk about how quickly or how much, and I'm one of those, how much quicker I recover now from that. But then also from injury, huge amounts of improvement in the speed of recovery. So
if you think about it, heart disease is still our number one killer, right? But we know that having diabetes is a huge risk for heart disease, more so than anything else probably. And if you go in for a cardiac procedure and you have diabetes, what are your chances of bouncing back from that? You know, you're going to do a lot better if you have your diabetes under control in the first place. So my point simply being that there are tremendous ripple effects out from this idea that we're going to work on metabolic health and that we're going to treat particular populations with clinical interventions that are going to help them heal and maybe put their disease into remission or reversal rather than simply progress. But we have to teach the public that that's possible, because right now the public doesn't know. The public still thinks that if they get diagnosed with diabetes, that it's a lifetime of medication and complications. They don't know that. So one of the jobs of the Society of Metabolic Health Practitioners is to educate the public. And then we were just talking the other day to Nevada Gray, who is a pharmacist. So she sees people coming in, and as the word starts to get out in the public that, yeah, diabetes, we can stop it in its tracks and maybe even begin to reverse it. They want this. But on the other side, there is a limited supply of practitioners who can deliver this intervention. And it's not, I believe really in my heart of hearts that it's not because they just, are going, I don't really care. We're just going to let these people progress with their diabetes. It's because they don't know. They don't know about it in general. And if they do know about it, they weren't trained in how to administer this protocol in medical school. I wasn't trained in my dietetics program, and that wasn't that long ago.
And it's not standard of care right now, so they're sometimes afraid from that perspective. So,
Right, but what is the standard of care? As we said, the standard of care is us doing it.
Right.
So it may not be standard of care for most, say, family practitioners, but if we train the family practitioners and give them confidence that they can do it and that they can reduce medication safely, and that dietitians, I talk about game changers. I think this is a game changer for the dietetics profession. Dietitians have been our biggest block. I think they've been our biggest obstacle in moving forward with this, because dietitians kind of go, that's not a keto diet, because we are trained in ketogenic diets for epilepsy, and they see internet keto and they say, that's not a keto diet, and they're right. They hear people having these sort of extreme ways of eating, or all I need to do is keep adding fat to my diet and the weight will just fall off, and all of those things that I talked about at Boca, where we do ourselves a disservice when we let these myths circulate and we don't step in and correct them. Protein is going to throw you out of ketosis and you'll gain weight. Oh, please. I mean, of the women, especially women that we saw in clinic, we could hardly get them to eat enough protein. I mean, they were not eating enough protein when they came in, and we're encouraging it. I mean, the old-fashioned Atkins diet, the heart of that diet is not fat. It is protein. And you don't have to remove the fat. You don't have to trim the fat off your steak. You don't have to take the skin off your chicken. You don't have to limit yourself to white meat instead of dark meat. You can eat the fat that comes with protein sources, because in nature, that's how it works. You get protein, you also get some fat. So Dr. Atkins said, and this is how he got away with it. He said, on my diet, you can eat as much as you want of protein foods, because how much protein food are you really going to eat? I mean, there is a natural, we have specific satiety signals that tell you to stop eating protein.
Yeah, I've had enough of that now, dude.
Yeah. So the Atkins diet actually limited some forms of fat, easily overconsumed fat, like mayonnaise and cream, things that it's easy to dump on our food and not think about. So those were actually limited. And this idea that more fat and more fat and more fat and more fat, the more fat, the better, I think has been a real detriment. And it's up to us, again, to step forward and say, is that really helping you? Because what do we want? We want people to be nourished, not just weight. If you lose weight and you lose muscle mass and bone mass along the way, what have you really accomplished? So this is another thing that I think this society is going to change, is the focus on obesity and weight, because metabolic health doesn't have the word obesity in it. It doesn't have the word bariatric in it. We are not as concerned about your weight as some other organizations might be, or some other approaches might be. We're concerned about your metabolic health. And I think this is another thing where we have to educate the public that you have the right to go to your doctor and have your health treated, not your weight. Because we've seen from the Virta studies and from other studies, Mary Gannon's, the Gannon and Nuttall studies, the bariatric surgery studies, that people's metabolisms will begin to right themselves long before a significant amount of weight comes off, when they change the amount of carbohydrate that goes in or other parameters of their diet. So we don't have to focus on people's weight. We can focus on their health, and we can let the weight come off naturally, as it will when your metabolism begins to be corrected, when we can start to get you off of medications. One of the cruelest things I think in the world is to tell people whose insulin dosage that you're escalating to lose weight, because Introduction to Anatomy and Physiology tells you what insulin does. And one of the things that insulin does is that it prevents your body from accessing fat stores. Makes it very difficult for your body to utilize stored fat. So yeah, give somebody another round of insulin, increase your insulin because your diabetes is not under control. Oh, but by the way, if you lost some weight, I wouldn't have to do this. That's just unfair and wrong. And to me, I think with this group, we can begin to change that conversation as well. So we educate patients, we educate clinicians so that they have, so that patients have somebody to go to with this. We work with dietitians. So this is the other thing that this society gives us, is it gives us professional standing. So all of a sudden, we're not a bunch of yahoos, right, with this crazy diet. We are a society of professionals that can interact with, align with, work with other societies, with other professionals, the American Diabetes Association, the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, other groups who want the same thing that we want, which is for people to be healthy. And we can begin to help educate them. We can align with them in their efforts. We can work with them on the things that they're trying to do. The American Diabetes Association, which just come out and said that carbohydrate reduction is one of the primary ways that we can help people with diabetes. But that's across all diets, so it doesn't have to be a particular kind of carbohydrate reduction. You can do it within a vegetarian diet or a vegan diet or a Mediterranean diet or whatever kind of diet. So you can adapt carbohydrate reduction to work with all of these diets, but who is actually doing that, right? So you have a lot of low carb keto advocates who are going, well, you can't have a low fat diet and a low carb diet at the same time. Well, is that true? You can't have a really low fat diet and a really low carb diet at the same time. But is there a way of balancing these macronutrients? Since they're really not the most important macronutrient, the most important one is protein, is there a way to balance this so that people who are concerned about their LDL, are concerned about other dietary components like cholesterol and fat, and can also reduce their carbohydrate and have the health benefits associated with that? So we don't have to be all or none, because it's not in the name, right? Metabolic health. It allows us to move towards metabolic health however we want to, and then work with the ADA and say, yeah, carbohydrate reduction in whatever sort of dietary pattern a patient prefers is something good. Do you guys know how to do that? You don't. Well, we do, and we can help you. So that's something else that we can do. One of the most important things that we can do is fundraise. So now that we have a place to do this, we can fundraise and get these communication messages out. We can fundraise and create these these educational strategies. We can fundraise and begin to support metabolic health practitioners in the work that they do with tools and resources and data collection methods that are standardized across our practice area. And once we do that, we can begin, if we're good and we do it right, to get that data back in from our clinicians and have a data pool that helps us to do our job even better.
Yeah,
And
we
to
were
me,
talking about that the other
yeah.
day, and I think that's going to be an astoundingly useful once
Yep.
we can get that done.
And that is, that's long-term planning. That's going to be a decade in the works. But if we start thinking about it now, as we create these clinical protocols, as we establish educational pathways, and start to help clinicians realize that they're not just treating patients, they are that place where the rubber meets the road, and they can help us continuously improve how we treat our patients. In the past, the Atkins diet, even when I was working with Eric Westman, was sort of, you get a page 4 and everybody goes and does it. And some people do really well and some people don't do so well. But we can do better than that. If we have data and we have information coming back from these clinical interactions, we can figure out, or we can start to figure out, which people are best suited for which kinds of interventions. And we can begin to break the data down that way so that we can do our jobs better and help the patient better, which is our ultimate goal here. So it's just a remarkable set of tools that were given by putting this professional organization together. So I mean, I've just rattled on for.
No, that's like I said, I was going to get out of your way because I knew you had a lot to say about it. That's pretty cool.
I think there are some cautions for us, but if you have some other questions, you could go ahead with those.
Well, no, not really questions, just a comment going back to something you said a little earlier, and that was about not being confrontational. I think we saw that when we first introduced the clinical guidelines, and we published it on the Low Carb USA website, with the intention, the main intention was to now have that as a starting point to eventually establish standard of care around carbohydrate restriction. But it was always as an alternative, as an option, as an alternative to the current standard of care. So we never came in there saying, we're right now, we've got this new thing that's how it has to be, and you're wrong. And I think because of that, it got all the trolls out of the way, and it didn't invite confrontation of any kind. It was just like, if you're interested in either becoming a part of this community, or you're interested to learn about it, then come and join us,
Yep.
And the only thing really was that Low Carb USA was never really the ideal place for that to have a home. And
right.
That to me is it's taken a long time to work out what that real home would look like. But working with you and Tro and all the people that have helped with this, that's what makes me so excited now, is that this is going to be the real home for this place. And and now that you've got this clinicians committee and all of these things within that organization to do the stuff that we talked about doing when we first talked about doing the general protocol, was then to start adding addenda to that for condition-specific issues, so that cancer and heart conditions and PCOS and all of these things often have nuances and things like that where needs to be done a little differently. And now we can actually document that and build on what we started out with the general protocol. So,
right. And it's important. I mean, I think that's key. And one of my cautions for us as a community is that we is that we don't pick fights, is that we aren't saying that we've discovered the one true way to health. And so you're either with us or against us, because that's not the case. We want to help people achieve metabolic health, but we're not going to say that there's just one way to do it. And I know that people are hesitant to even sort of agree that that's a reasonable way to go. But underneath it all, we're still going to tell people, reduce your carbs. Well, think about it. If you think about what good health means, what metabolic health means, and what a diet, I'll leave lifestyle issues aside for just a minute, but just in terms of nutrition, what is a healthy diet? Well, like I said, way back when we made a big mistake, and we took a clinical protocol and we put it into public health. But the corollary to that mistake is that we also said, now we have a diet that's not only going to fix what's already wrong with you, because we're not talking to a clinical population anymore. So we're not talking about people who are already sick. This is a diet for healthy people. And as Richard Feynman likes to say, if you're already healthy, what are we doing telling you how to eat? Which is a good point. The diet the dietary guidelines, this low fat, higher carbohydrate, avoid sodium, avoid sugar, which was always a part of it as well. This is meant to prevent disease, and not prevent disease as in prevent prediabetes from becoming full-blown diabetes or prevent full-blown diabetes from progressing. It was meant to prevent a disease you didn't know you had, you might not be at risk for, you might not have any family history of, and that frankly, you might not ever get because you're not ever going to get it. But they were going to give you a prescription to intervene with your perfectly healthy self and do this diet and supposedly prevent every chronic disease known to mankind. I mean, that's the absurd part. When I read back through those old transcripts, the congressional hearings and things like that, the fact that we had the gall and the hubris to think that we had one diet that was going to prevent every chronic disease that we could think of. Heart disease, diabetes, stroke, cancer, obesity, everything. For everyone, everywhere. I mean, it's absurd on the surface. When I say that, and I'm at communication conferences, people laugh. And when I say that and I'm in front of dietitians, they go, well, of course. And it's absurd on the surface. There's no one diet that is going to prevent chronic diseases in everyone. And I mean, maybe there is, but if there is, we don't know it. If there is a diet that's going to prevent chronic disease in a perfectly healthy person, a person who's healthy now and shows no sign of metabolic disease, that's going to prevent metabolic disease 30 years from now, we don't know what that diet is. It's not a diet low in fat. We don't have that evidence. It's not a diet low in carbs. We don't have that evidence either.
Yeah. It's even going to be, I mean, how difficult is it to ever even get that evidence? I mean, somebody is healthy, and I mean, how do you know? I mean, you can't even start to try to accumulate evidence on that. It's just like you said, I think you never will know. What we can do maybe is look at the biochemistry and decide for ourselves what we feel will and from our experience in terms of how we've responded to eating different stuff, how we feel that we need to eat in order to maintain our own health.
Well, diet has to do one thing first. Always has to do one thing first, and that's nourish your body, right? So we know that. Yeah. And we've started to build these into the principles that we talk about with the Society of Metabolic Health Practitioners, is every diet has to do this one thing, has to nourish your body. It has to provide adequate essential nutrition, adequate protein, essential fatty acids, vitamins and minerals that are essential. And we would prefer, although we don't insist, we would prefer that this happen without fortification or enrichment. So in other words, we would prefer that whatever way that you get your nourishment, that you get it from foods where it's not sprayed on or dumped in, or you don't have to take a supplement to get it. So, but again, we're not insisting upon that. That's just a preferable way to do it. And if you think about that first, essential nutrition, well, carbohydrates are way down at the bottom of the list because there are no essential carbohydrates. Now, fiber, yeah, but fiber comes with vitamins and minerals in vegetables, right? So if you're getting your vitamins and minerals, you're probably eating vegetables unless you're a carnivore, and that's another subset that I'm not going to worry about right
that's
now.
another rabbit hole.
But you're going to get fiber. What we noticed in clinic when I was working with Eric Westman is that when we took the carbohydrate out of people's diet, they ate more vegetables. They ate more vegetables than they'd ever been eating before. Why? Because that's what replaced the carbohydrate. People think that if we take the carbohydrate out of people's diet that they just start eating steaks and bacon and brie. Well, they don't because they can't. There's a natural limit on that. But you can eat a lot of vegetables. So the one thing that we're always telling people that they should do, that we've been telling people that they should do since I was a kid, right? Eat your vegetables. I grew up with that mantra. That's what people do on low-carb diets. They eat their vegetables. What else do? They reduce their calories, right? So everything that's in this this diet that provides adequate nutrition and not a whole lot else is doing things that public health nutrition wants people to do. Eat vegetables and lower your calories, right? So in that regard, it fits in with the public health paradigm. But the part of the public health paradigm that's missing, that has been missing since 1980, is the idea of metabolic health. So, fun story, and this is a little geek out moment. We have this idea, especially in the low carb community, that Ansel Keys came along and he just steamrolled those dietary guidelines into existence. Didn't work that way. So when the dietary guidelines, when the McGovern's dietary goals were being created in 1977, and then the dietary guidelines 3 years later in 1980, there was a lot of controversy around, first, whether there should even be dietary guidelines. So that was the first question. But then after after the McGovern report came out and that group said, well, yes, there should be these guidelines, the public latched onto them with enthusiasm. Who wouldn't? It was a prescription to be able to live a long, what do we call it, health span, right? That you would be healthy, and then drop dead of natural causes in your late 90s, right? And so who wouldn't love that? The public loved it. They wanted that idea, and especially, white upper middle class people who pursued health. So they latched onto that idea, and they wanted the government to come out with its one voice. But at that time, there was still a lot of competition about what this prescription should look like. So the dietary guidelines had stiff competition coming from this Toward Healthful Diet document that was put out by the Food and Nutrition Board. And the Food and Nutrition Board said two things: eat a varied diet, which is nutrition code for get adequate essential nutrition, because you're eating a variety of foods, so you're likely to get all of the vitamins, minerals, et cetera, that you need. And the other part that they said is eat a diet that helps you not gain weight. And what they were pointing at was metabolic health. They didn't use those terms, but what they were saying is eat a diet. We're not going to tell you what diet, but eat a diet that helps you maintain metabolic health. And that could have been our national dietary guidelines. And there's a lot of political reasons that it didn't. But I think that we need to look back at that and think about those. If we're going to say there's one true diet for everyone, that one true diet is one that nourishes the body and gives you your adequate essential nutrition. It's one that helps you maintain metabolic health. And if you haven't been able to maintain metabolic health, then that's what our metabolic health practitioners are there for. And then the other thing that's sort of a little addendum to that is it should honor or at least acknowledge your traditional and cultural foodways. One of the big upsets of 1980 with the dietary guidelines is that it started telling people that a lot of traditional, highly valued foods like eggs, meat, cheese, foods that Americans ate and had been eating and have been doing fine on for a long time, should be replaced by things like cereal, tofu, and vegetable oil.
Yeah.
So just going back to thinking about our traditional foods, and now the further we get away from 1980, of course, the further we get away from even knowing what those look like. But thinking about them, and these aren't diets that completely eliminate carbohydrate, right? These aren't diets that, before the obesity rate started climbing, it's not that we were eating low carb diets, but we were eating diets that were more based on these foods that were nutrient dense and that our ancestors and our ancestors before that had been eating. These weren't necessarily unprocessed foods. They weren't necessarily whole foods, but they were foods that we were used to, that we preferred, that we enjoyed, and that we managed to stay relatively healthy eating.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really cool place to leave it. Thank you for imparting all this excitement.
It's exciting. It's very exciting.
It is. And I'm planning to air this. When I do, it'll hopefully even be on the day that we officially launch this thing and go live with it. So if people are listening to this, metabolicpractitioners.org, I'll put it in the show notes. Come and check it out. And like I said about what we did with the guidelines on the Low Carb USA site was like, even if you just want to come and learn, there's going to be so much education there and so much that, even when we go live to start with, there's going to be a ton of stuff, but then it's just going to grow exponentially from there. There's so much. Are you
going to have a place for people to volunteer to get in touch with us?
So there's
lots to do.
Yeah. So under the committees, if you learn about us, there's a bunch of different committees, and under each committee, there'll be a place for people to come and offer their services if they want to help become a part of the solution instead of the problem.
Yes, so, and to remind people that even though we are the Society for Metabolic Health Practitioners, you do not have to be a clinician to be a part of this activity.
Correct, and that's if you look when people actually sign up, one of the things is there's a category that they're in, and there's clinicians and allied healthcare professionals and nurses and a bunch of others, but there's also, the keto coach and the people that are working on, and it's such an important piece of it. Is like, yes, the clinician talks to their, or the doctor or the registered dietitian or whatever, talks to their patient and convinces them hopefully that this is what they need to do, that they maybe need to make a change. But most people are not able to just go out there and do it. They need some kind of guidance. Some of it is just like a document that tells them what they need to do. And others, it's hand-holding. And so there's going to be all those people are going to be now in this list of providers now, those people that can do that job. And there'll be online programs available to point people to that can help them as well. I think, I don't know, words fail me in terms of how important I think this is going to be. And I'm really, really inspired, I suppose is not even the right word, but I'm just so happy to be able to be a part of it. It's been cool. And thank you for pointing me in this direction in the first place. I think it was a discussion I had with you back in 2018 when Gary, you talked about doing that town hall thing. Gary suggested it, and he suggested that I speak to you. And
because he didn't want to have to do any work.
No, but I was probably going to have to do it. It ended up being a whole lot better because you did it. But when I contacted you, he put me in touch with you. And when I contacted you, I said, would you be prepared to mediate this town hall session? And you didn't say yes. You just sent me this document with, this is what you need to do, to change the world. And it was, I say so many times, every time I talk about this, I say it made me weak at the knees. It was so overwhelmingly big, your vision. But, I read it over and over and it started to realize that we already had a few building blocks in place. And that these other things, maybe we can do this. And
it was a dream come true for me to have Low Carb USA behind this. Like, I would have written this general protocol. I could have written it at any point in time, but I didn't have an advisory board. I didn't have any place to publish it. I mean, we didn't have the structure for that.
Yeah.
And then here you were saying, if you can just herd the kittens, I'll put the kittens on the advisory board and we'll get them all moving in the same direction and we'll have a place to proclaim it. And now it's being translated into how many different languages? Where are we?
Oh, I was about to, I didn't tell you. It's about 7 now, 6, 7. But it wasn't on the Low Carb USA side, but when it's published on the SMHP, we've got an Italian translation as well now. And I'm having a Malay translation done for the whole of Malaysia. So that should be ready in about a month. So yeah, so we've got.
That's super exciting, because in some of these places, as we have learned, it's not a matter of convincing the doctors. There's not enough doctors to go around. People are actually like using what in their community
Online resources
are lay, lay health coaches and community experts to help translate this into what you can do within your own community. And we don't have to worry about safely getting these people off of medications, because they don't have medications to be on. So it's one of these things where the ripple effects of these, you and I will never know about them. We'll never know, but it's enough to know that they're out there and at work while we sleep. It's wonderful.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. So yeah, thanks again for doing this. I know you're taking your time off on your Saturday and stuff, so thank you for doing that. And yeah, I look forward to where this is going to go. I think I was talking to a couple of people this morning that are involved with you and on the committees and that, and it's just like and this is just the start. And I think, just like with Low Carb USA, when I started 5 years ago and we decided we wanted to put on a conference. I mean, where we've gone from there, we've done 15 conferences now, and we've published these clinical guidelines and developed provider databases and all stuff that we'd never even thought about when we first started. And I think this is going to eclipse what we ever did on Low Carb USA in terms of its impact and its reach. So,
well, I'm so glad that you got pointed, that you felt like you were being pointed in a direction, and then you just took off. And I can't tell you how excited I am that you've really seen into my mind and done this in a way that I feel like I can support 100%. I mean, you have made no false moves, and it's such a big open tent. It's such a warm, inviting place for all healthcare providers who are concerned about their patients' health and not about promoting an ideology or an agenda. It's really, I think it's going to change the way that we think about providing healthcare, because we're going to be forced to make sure that we're doing the work that our patients need to be successful. And I think that underneath all of that, that's what's going on here. And it's going back to a patient-centered approach, which we've gotten away from. We're writing prescriptions, whether they're dietary prescriptions or medical prescriptions. And we're going to have to go back to seeing the patient as an individual, and then using those teams, like you said, all the allied healthcare professionals, the coaches, the nurses, the pharmacists, the dietitians, to support that patient in their journey towards metabolic health. We have to do that. And you have provided an environment that's going to allow that to happen. It's really beautiful.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you. This is so awesome.
Goosebumps.
I have to pinch myself. Seriously,
I know.
I have to pinch myself to remind that this is actually real, that it really is about to happen. Thank you. We'll speak a lot soon, I'm sure.
Yes.
Okay.
Thanks for doing this.
Okay,
It was fun.
bye. Cheers, bye. You've been listening to an episode of the Low Carb USA podcast. You can support us on Patreon at patreon.com/lowcarbusa.